Such a long time.
Excellent. We are recording. That's good, good, good. Okay, so welcome everybody to Active Travel Cafe. In a moment, we're going to Arthur Kay, who's with Henrietta Moore, is the co-author of Roadkill, Unveiling the True Cost of Our Toxic Relationship with Cars. So Arthur's our key presentation this evening. Really looking forward to that, Arthur. Can't wait to hear from you on that. Before we get into all of that, we're going to do our crowdsourced news update. So would anybody like to share an update from where they are, what's been happening in the week gone by? Adam.
I'm going to come in something which I expect might have been covered, but the local transport plan guidance that came out also set within it a requirement that LC WIPs, local cycling walking infrastructure plans, need to be refreshed every 4 to 5 years. Now, I've noted locally at WECA that they're now at 6 years and probably going to be at 7 years before that is refreshed. So when they do your local transport plan, the statutory guidance requires you to have that. I suspect because most LC WIPs were sort of triggered around about the just around 2020 for many of them, if not earlier, or just that there's a whole swathe of these LC WIPs which are now effectively out of date and there is I don't know if other places have any officers already trying to get these refreshed, or they've just treated it as here we are, here's a document we produced 10 years 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and we're good with it. But actually they should now be refreshing this and going through an exercise to keep it relevant. I don't And I think this also comes into the actual travel capability scoring as well. So I think this is one of those areas where I think there could be an interesting play, but I don't know if other people are hitting or are finding this. But I thought I'd raise that anyway.
Thanks, Adam. Um, Jump in, anybody, if you do have any insights, or post them in the chat around the LC whips and refreshing. That'd be good to know. Or stick your hand up and I'll bring you in. Ruth, have we got an update from you in Chiswick?
Well, as I'm often negative, this is a bit of a jolly update and it's personal. I cycled on one of the new line bikes yesterday, and I've never been on one before on any of the hire bikes here. And it was an absolute joy, and they're brilliant. And I can see why so many people are using them. They're very light, they're very easy, they're very safe feeling, perfect for women, nice and short people. And I think they're fantastic, and I think everyone should have them. Thank you.
Oh, that is very true, Ruth. Ruth, I do not have you pegged as always doom and gloom, by the way, and I'm sure nobody else does. So just don't put yourself in that pigeonhole because we don't have you there. Beth, in Torbay, you got your hand up.
Hi, Steve. Thanks. I just joined a little bit late, so I don't know if anyone else went to the amazing Global Bike Bus Summit. No?
Nobody's flagged it. It might just be you, Beth.
It
Take us
was
there.
incredible. Yeah. So it's very interesting because Lisbon Municipal Authority have actually funded bike bus drivers and leaders. So it's run like a whole professionalized program. It's a very different model to the community thing. Yeah, clap, and it's interesting, but um, there are pros and cons to everything because the parents do, it's like a bus service almost. The parents just drop off, which is great. But there are pros and cons. But I mean, the whole thing was amazing, amazing. 2 days of just lots and lots of positive people, energy, lots of discussion about kind of women in transport planning, which is obviously something I'm very interested in, and and also how we can use things like these movements to then actually accelerate the infrastructure changes that we want to see, and things like that. So yeah, a super inspiring thing, and yeah, I mean the guys from Bike Worcester were there. I'm sure they'd be happy to give you a rundown at some point because they're really great at it all. And but yeah, it was really great. The next one's in Portland in Oregon in America. So if anyone wants to mark that one in their calendar, it's going to be great.
Or should we make an Active Travel Cafe overseas fact finder? Do we still do those? It's a
I
bit
think
high
it's
carbon.
essential, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, Beth.
Study
You've
trip.
convinced me. Drop us, send us an email with any suggestions for speakers on that topic that we should scout out. Brilliant. Thanks, Beth. That sounds really exciting. Tim.
With my social media history, I would not be able to get into the United States for the Portland Bike Summit, and I guess quite a few of us would also fail that test. That's not why I put my hand up. This is about a car that Leicester City Council has bought for £57,000, equipped with CCTV, and it patrols double red line routes. It goes school streets. And it has caught 1,500 people so far illegally parked and charged them each 75 quid for the privilege of doing that, and has doubled its cost in fines. Isn't that brilliant? In 1 month, 1 month. I'll put it in the chat and you can all go, ooh, can we buy a car for our active travel campaign? Right, see ya.
Brilliant, thanks, Tim. Driving that car is the best job, isn't it? Amazing, brilliant. Dave. Birmingham.
Just very briefly, I mean, I've been out of the country for 10 days, so I'm a bit behind with things. We've got elections in Birmingham tomorrow, and I just want to commend what Better Streets for Birmingham have done. It's on their website, and it's a podcast, an absolutely thorough exploration of what every party says about road danger, active travel and transport generally. And it's a podcast. It's on their, which they do really well. And it's on their website. I can put a link on later, but it's just really good. And compared to the rather amateurish campaigning we've been doing in push bikes since 1979, I'm incredibly impressed by it. So I'd certainly commend it. But, you know, if you might be able to use it next time elsewhere, or whether other people are doing similar, I don't know. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, please do send the link. And as ever with Active Travel Cafe, we can replicate the very best that people are doing, can't we? In other places. That's brilliant. H in Glasgow. Did you come in, H?
Okay, hang on. That's got it. First of all, Steve, apology. I haven't got it's a wiggity. I haven't got that email off for you with all the links. There's more coming.
Brilliant.
Amazon are now using quads. Is it the Callow ones? They're look pretty testes canisiae. Battery powered, exchangeable batteries. They carry a spare battery with them, and they accelerate up to 15 mile an hour like a rocket. Pedal assist and got the thing on the back. Voy bike wise, very interesting. We've got the two sorts. The small wheel, which is about a 16-inch tyre, and the large wheel, which is about a 26-inch. They swap the batteries again on these. I'm not quite sure. Lime and Forest swapping batteries as well. Does anybody know that one? It means that the staff go round. They get a message when the battery is low, so that the batteries are swapped by a staff member. Usually, sometimes they're cycling, but quite often they're using vans, which is appalling because the vans are pulling up onto the footway to change the batteries on the bikes. And it does mean that the bikes are attended by somebody who checks them over to change the batteries, tidy up the bike parking, and pick up any bikes that are broken down. So I don't know how that's working in London, but it's certainly working that way in Edinburgh and Glasgow.
Thanks, H. I think there's a couple of posts in the chat answering some of that. So have a look at the chat, H, and you'll see what other people have been thinking or confronting in that space. Brilliant stuff. Thanks, H. And last, before we go to Arthur in our presentation, David from Active Travel England. Come on in.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm an inspector at ATE, and I'm currently delivering some research in collaboration with the University of Leeds. So this is exploring the critical safety issues for walking, wheeling and cycling. And there's a couple of parts to the research, doing some primary analysis, literature review, but we're also, as part of this, we're doing a user questionnaire, and I'd really welcome input from those on the call, and also I'd welcome sharing of the questionnaire amongst your contacts. So I will just drop the link into the chat for everyone. Thanks.
Brilliant, David. Happy to share that and spread the word. Brilliant stuff.
H
is back.
Can I just pick up something, Steve, quickly? You know, Ben Knoll has been running this thing about modern slavery. All of the people who are doing Deliveroo and such like are modern slavery, what they're being paid for it. Likewise, the article's just run in the Grocer about deliveries. We really need to get all these delivery bikes regulated, because there are a lot of gig workers who the employer will deny are employees. They're being paid ridiculous, and a lot of people who are not allowed to work in this country, asylum seekers, are paying on the black market to get a phone and an identity. And the principals like Deliveroo, Uber Eats, do not do any checks. They need to be regulated.
Brilliant. Thanks, H. And I saw people nodding in agreement with you there. Great stuff. Okay. Thanks, H. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, David. So without further ado, we have our main presentation. For those who've only just joined, we've got Arthur Kay with us. Arthur, you're very, very welcome. Really looking forward to this. And with Henrietta Moore, you are the co-author of Roadkill, Unveiling the True Cost of Our Toxic Relationship with Cars. Really looking forward to this. Not that I'm biased, but totally very excited about the book. So Arthur, can I hand over to you?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Steve. And it's absolutely brilliant to be here this afternoon. Thank you all very much for tuning in. I'm going to share my screen, and we've done a test, so I'm hoping that this will work. Bear with me. I'm hoping you can see this.
Yeah, that's looking good, Arthur.
Brilliant. So today I wanted to share a few thoughts, and as Steve kindly said, they're from this book that we wrote and this came out last year, called Roadkill. And I guess the core ideas within the book will be very, very familiar to many people in this group. So I'm not going to rehearse those. And instead, I wanted to spend the time talking about this concept that we've been working on in the back half of the book, and have been working on in the month since. And that's this idea that we're calling the road to 100 trillion. And this is this idea around, simply, if we look at a global perspective, how much we currently drive, which is around a whopping 17 trillion miles each year, and how, if we project ahead on some of the current trends, and particularly some of the current technological trends, how we believe we're on a path to reach 100 trillion in the coming 15 years or so. So maybe just to give you a little bit about me first. And some of these affiliations, I think particularly the TfL one, I might get kind of lucky I'm online here, so you don't throw rotten vegetables at me. But I wear a few different hats which are relevant to this conversation. The first is as a board member of Transport for London. The second is as a board member of the Royal Academy of Engineering. And the third is as a professor of practice at University College London. And I sit within the Bartlett Institute of the Built Environment there. And as Steve said, I guess the particular pertinence is around the author of this book, Roadkill. So maybe we kind of start off kind of thinking about this in terms of the road to 100 trillion with this image. And I wonder, maybe, I know people have been asked to be on mute, but I invite you to shout out if anyone can guess where this, or knows, I should say, where this image is from.
Jane Jacobs.
Good guess. So this is from actually the same city, Tim. It's from the New York World Fair in the late 1930s. And they were thrilled, the organizers, because they managed to get a sponsor to imagine the future city. And their sponsor was, you'll be shocked to hear, was General Motors. And General Motors had a really good idea, which they're saying, imagine if the whole city was designed entirely around the motor car, because we'll be able to convince everyone it's great. You can get anywhere really fast and all the rest of it, and we'll sell tons of our product. Fantastic. Very simple idea, worked really well. But the sad reality was that one of the key advisors on this, chap called Norman Geddes, became one of the key advisors to the later president, and was involved in actually building out a lot of the infrastructure that looked suspiciously like that, which meant that you then have cities today. This is Sheikh Zayed Road in Dubai, which look suspiciously similar to the vision set out back in the 1930s. So the car industrial complex was not only embedded within, North American cities, it was also exported very successfully around the world. And I guess why I'm particularly interested in this is I'm not a transport planner. My background actually is an architect in the built environment, but very simplistically, I think that if we think of this as kind of path dependency, we have chosen to go down this path for better or worse. We are where we are now, so we can, to an extent, undo certain things, but really thinking about in the years ahead, whether we can make our cities very simplistically better or worse places. I think, like many people in the school, I think that the vision built by General Motors is not the vision that we all want to live in. And when we think about cars in our cities, what in the book we call it the car industrial complex, and what we believe they're trying to do is to do a sleight of hand, and this is adapted to an extent from the brilliant work of Peter Norton, but is to resell us this idea of that, okay, we get it that fossil fuel cars are wrong, but trust us, it'll be a lot better if you just buy our next product, which is the electric car. And then indeed, if you buy our next product, which is the autonomous car, and I think the contention, which I know is at the heart of your work, Steve, and the Active Travel Cafe, is around actually if we can build futures that look like the one on the far right here, the walk, wheel, cycle, and public transport, rather than a private car dominated future. And when we look at what we're calling the road to 100 trillion, there are three main drivers of that. So today there are about 1.7 billion cars in the world, and we drive around 17 trillion miles each year. So how are we going to bridge this gap to 100? I'm conscious that Steve will probably be reversing entropy and delivering a lot of this directly through the Active Travel Cafe. But in lieu of, if Steve goes under gets run over one day, sadly, then who's going to be carrying the mantle? And so these three drivers are, I believe, going to be driving the greater demand for vehicle miles traveled. And if we look at it from a VMT perspective, and this is for those who aren't kind of steeped in the kind of joys of road transport, this is kind of a kind of crude metric for how far people move in cars or in different modes of transport. We've gone from obviously from the invention of the car back in the 1880s through relatively slow starts in terms of that, but that's really seeing that ramping up in the years since the 1970s. But when we look ahead, what we're actually projecting is something that looks more like this, that what we've seen thus far is nothing yet, and that those vehicle miles traveled are going to absolutely explode. So let's take these three cogs that I believe are going to be driving this. So the first is around electric cars, which is I was born in 1990. In the years since 1990, that's been the only kind of sector that's materially increased in terms of emissions. And critically kind of ties into this idea in terms of induced demand. The piece that went completely unreported in my world certainly was a study that came out in September last year by two scientists at Norwegian University of Science and Technology. So in Norway, they've done something extraordinary, which is that over the last, really since 2007, the government has subsidized roughly 47 billion pounds to transition, what our government is trying to do, to transition from a primarily ICE-based car system to one that's predominantly battery electric vehicles. In that transition, I say subsidies around 47 billion. However, what they found was that through the induced demand of lower cost driving, through perhaps an improved driving experience and all the rest of it, that people who own electric cars drive roughly 20% more than their ICE equivalents. I can leave a link in the chat if people are interested in some of these references as well. But and if we look at the stats in terms of how many new cars sold in Norway last quarter, roughly 94.5% of those cars sold were electric. So we need to be really careful what we wish for in terms of the induced demand from that, and more. Whilst you could make arguments for improved environmental and air quality performance of electric cars, which we can debate offline perhaps, but you can certainly make those arguments. The reality is that we are driving more with electric cars than we are with our ICE counterparts. So we need to be really careful with that. So if we apply those metrics across those 17 trillion at the moment, and we do that successful transition that so many governments want from ICE to battery electric vehicles, we could see that. I suspect we will see that 20% greater induced demand in terms of that. The second kind of key metric we're looking at is one I think will be very familiar to all of you as well, which is around this idea of the emerging middle class in the global south. So the big mega cities of the global south, it's no surprise, are huge. The huge engines of we hope huge engines of prosperity, and at the moment they are dominated by people who walk, wheel, and cycle, not because they want to, but because they have to, because they don't have the economic prosperity to be able to go and buy a car or to be able to ride share or do other things. But with the growth that I think we all, as humans, we hope that will happen in terms of their material prosperity, that will potentially come with a vast change in how they choose to move around their cities. For those who've spent time in cities in the global south, I think you probably already think these are quite intense and quite congested places. So how that's going to work, I think, is a mystery to many. But let's look at that in practical terms. So at the moment, this is the rough split of how cars in the world are spread across the world. You can see, I mean, in the rich global north, USA is unsurprisingly leading, and then in the global south and emerging markets, countries like China are still rising in terms of that. But what I want to draw attention to is particularly countries in the African continent and in the Eurasian and Asian subcontinent. So this is what we might typically expect a city in India or Pakistan to look like, which is a busy streetscape with a lot of people on foot, different modes of transport all bustling together with that, and people on 2 wheels, people on 3 wheels, people on no wheels. And I say a lot of that is driven by a lack of material prosperity for that. But if you look at the business plans of Volvo or BMW or any of the big car companies, their business plan is explicit. They don't pull any punches. There's nothing wrong with this. Their business plan is our growth. We acknowledge that the global north is slowing and that we are not selling enough vehicles here. Our growth is around marketing this vision of freedom to the emerging middle class in the global south. And very crudely, they want people to transition from 2 wheels to 4 wheels. And what that looks like at the moment is, and we can debate some of these figures in terms of what that is, but this is really here to show orders of magnitude in terms of where we are with these things. But the US has roughly 99 out of 10 households have access to a private car. In the UK, it's roughly 8 out of 10. And then we can see right down, India, Kenya. I mean, I think Nigeria is about 4.2%. Most of sub-Saharan Africa is under 4%. So, and these are vast populations which are transitioning rapidly to the global south. If we looked at China even 15 years ago, that figure would be closer, about 9%. So the transition is rapid. It's fantastic in terms of global prosperity. It's terrible in terms of how we may think about those VMTs ramping up and up and up. And so these yellow bars here are really to highlight this is the delta between that American mode of development and and let's say where India is at the moment. The challenge here as well is that a lot of the big funding institutions for development infrastructure are proactively building roads and motorways. So if we look at the projects that are being delivered by the World Bank, for example, or equivalent multilateral funding bodies, these are often driving a certain kind of culture, and part of that is around the modes of urbanism that are sought to be exported around the world. The third piece, I think, is this is kind of particularly of interest to me with my Transport for London hat on in terms of as a regulating authority for this, but autonomous cars are being sold as a solution to some of this. I think this is stuff which may sound a bit futuristic to some on this call, but I think, well, the reality is that they're now being trialed on London streets and will be, well, if the autonomous car companies have their way, will be rolled out commercially in Q3 this calendar year. So we're talking September, October 2026. So this has moved from the world of science fiction to the world of it is on your streets, it's going to be in your neighborhood. And I'm sure many of you will have seen, if those of you who are based in London or the Southeast may well have seen them pootling around on your streets. So there's a whole bunch of stuff which we can talk about when it comes to autonomous cars, whether that's technology, whether that's in-car safety, whether that's cybersecurity. But again, the theme of this talk is around vehicle miles traveled. So let's zoom in on that element of it. So roughly today we have, it's tiny. There are 1.7 billion cars in the world, as I mentioned, and there are roughly 6,000, so only 6,000 commercially operating robotaxis. So a very, very small number. For a whole bunch of microeconomic reasons, this is likely to change, and very, very rapidly. And part of that is going to be driven by demand, and part of that's going to be driven by simply the cost of capital for the big technology companies that sit behind this. To put some numbers to that, the big companies who are behind this are companies like Baidu, are companies like Alphabet, who own Google and also own Waymo, are companies like Amazon.com. So these are companies like Tesla. These companies who have a market capitalization larger than most European economies. The economy of the UK is, let's say, 3.9 trillion. The market cap of Alphabet, the owner of Google, is 4.2 trillion. The market cap of Nvidia is around 5. I'm not up to date on my market caps, but around 5 trillion, say. So these are vast, vast businesses, and they're going to be deploying at scale. Their cost of capital, their cost to actually buy the kit, is incredibly inexpensive to do so. And if we look at data out of some of the cities where robotaxis are already operating, particularly in the United States and China, we see that from around, in San Francisco, for example, in the Bay Area, in 2025, they went from fewer than 5% of rides being in a Waymo to, by the end of that calendar year, so in a 12-month stretch, 28%, over 1 in 4 private hire vehicle rides were in a robotaxi. So I think we need to be very cognizant of both whilst it seems very small now, the scale will grow rapidly. And whilst it seems very small now in terms of number of potential rides, again, that can grow rapidly. And this is really around the power law when it comes to some of these technologies. And some of the wealthiest and most powerful companies in the world, this is Jensen Huang, the chief executive of the world's most valuable company, Nvidia, who at his CES launch in Las Vegas in January of this year said that someday every car, every single truck will be autonomous. So they're betting a lot of money, and their public statements in terms of that this is what they're going to be delivering, and a lot of the market capitalization of these businesses are based on this. So this is my my more light, humorous penultimate, one of my last slides to share, which is around, we need to be very mindful of what this is. I know some of the operators of these companies personally. They are very clever people. They're very hardworking people. They're very wealthy people. They are very interested in scaling what they see as a life-saving technology. There are genuine potential benefits that could be deployed in terms of that. And they are talking to European politicians at the most senior level you can imagine, saying, hey, let us into your city, and we are going to do so. I think that's going to undermine our sovereignty. I think that's going to make life for those of us who live in cities materially worse. And I think it's going to perpetuate I believe the biggest crisis of the 20th century was the proliferation of and the power of the car industrial complex. And I believe one of the biggest challenges of the 21st is the power that big tech has over our time, our lives, our wallets, and our attention. And I think the combination is going to be very, very, very powerful indeed. So what can we do about it? Again, I think some of these things will be completely blindingly obvious to the people on this webinar. First, I believe, is around making cities incrementally denser. This means building not in residential, in kind of low density neighborhoods, but around how we can take existing cities and find infill and airspace developments and equivalent that work around that. That doesn't mean building skyscrapers. I mean incremental density that might be 3 to 8 stories, but not necessarily massive towers. The second, again, I think will be very familiar to many here. And I was thrilled to hear kind of talk of the potential benefits of Lime and some of the stuff going around there. But encourage movement on two wheels where possible. I'm conscious that's not possible for everyone, but kind of broadly walking, wheeling, cycling. And then number 3, which I think is probably the more, with my regulator's hat on, is probably a piece around how we can capture the full costs of the car. I think even big car acknowledges there are externalities that come with driving. There are different ways of capturing some of those externalities, and how can we use the opportunities of EVs, of AVs, to capture some of the more of the capital the costs of some of those externalities more effectively. So again, very familiar to be on this call. And I'll end with a few different images. So this is our friends at Lime. The key here, I think, is not necessarily reinventing new things. I think I looked at this when this came to London in 2018 or whenever it was, and thought, wow, what a great innovation. But the reality was that I then, when writing the book Roadkill, discovered my new pin-up, who is Lady Priscilla Norman, who is one of the most fantastic and inspiring figures I've come across in my recent years. This is a photo taken on her autobed scooter in 1916, and because she was a suffragette, and she wanted to make sure that she wanted to nip around London and go to meetings and to talk to crowds, but she didn't want to get sweaty in her Victoria or late Edwardian dress, and so would zip around on her e-scooter. So she's my kind of pin-up of the year. And similarly, the e-bike, this is the original patent in the US from 1897 in terms of the e-bike. And I normally have a image. I mean, the Mrs. Henry Ford used to drive around in an electric car because she found that the getting grease on the hands of starting a traditional car was too much of a hassle as well. So this idea of Back to the Future, I think, is quite a powerful one as well, in terms of people thinking these are kind of wacky innovations. Actually, these have been around for well over 100 years. And then the final piece is just thinking about how we can actually cover some of those externalities that still exist when it comes to AVs and EVs. We can debate this figure, but there's a study I often reference which shows that driving in a city costs society around 76 cents per kilometre travelled. There are also a whole bunch of other stuff that these costs need to be fully captured, which currently are not. So, and this particularly is true when it comes to autonomous vehicles as well. And so let me leave you with this thought, which is around how we can, I guess, I think the work that you're all doing here in terms of the Active Travel Cafe is absolutely critical to this, but we also need to be cognizant to the scale of the challenge and the power of the car industrial complex combined with big tech and what that is going to do to our cities. There's going to be a vast amount of capital spent to change the hearts and minds of your friends, your family, your loved ones. Hopefully this is, and the book Roadkill is giving you a bit of a crib sheet to be able to bring into battle some of these questions, because this is also to an extent about power, about who owns our streets, who has the right to decide who spends time on those streets. And the way that it's going is that we're going to have a lot more, even despite what's happening on this call, we're going to have many, many more cars dominating the central cities, let alone the cities in the global south as well. So thank you very much for your time and attention. Steve, I don't know if we have time for a few questions afterwards, or how you typically run these things, but I'm very happy to stay on and answer a few of those as well if people would like to.
Excellent stuff, Arthur. Thank you so much. That was absolutely astounding. Loads of rounds of applause going on, Arthur. The little bit of bike and scooter nostalgia at the end was a particular crowd pleaser. It's like you knew your audience incredibly well. We've got some questions already in the Q&A. So if you haven't found it already, please do pop your questions in there. And we've got a couple from H and some from John. So I'll come to those in just a second. Just to abuse my privilege, Arthur, as facilitated just for a second, I've got a couple of questions for you around arguments. Well, one argument that I've heard around autonomous vehicles, which is because our cars are the sort of second most expensive thing that we invest in, but remain parked and underutilized 93% of the time. There's this natural tendency to use our cars more than we might, simply because we've sunk so much money into them. Is there any scenario that you've explored where autonomous cars, because they break, they rupture that ownership connectivity, they might result in us traveling a little bit less by car. And then my second question, if you don't mind, I'm being really cheeky now, is the one of the big tech moments in urban mobility that really sticks in my mind is when dockless bike systems were being rolled out across our cities at massive scale by mainly Chinese companies. And it was almost like a race to get sign-ups and subscriber levels high, and then they completely collapsed and resulted in huge mountains of scrapped bikes. And I thought that was really interesting because I can see a scenario where you could imagine autonomous vehicles going down a really interesting sort of boom and bust pattern as well. So what are your thoughts on those two things, Arthur? And I'll bring in others.
I think both completely bang on thoughts and pieces to discuss, and there's so much to unpack here, so we won't even touch the sides of it. I think firstly on the boom and bust piece, yes, although these are significantly better capitalized than some of the and with a much higher barrier to entry than some of the micromobility operators. So I suspect they'll be less intense, and the regulation is going to be significantly higher for it. However, I still think there will be an element of it. I don't think it'll be in a situation we have a Waymo left in a ditch in Greenwich, for example, but certainly something to consider particularly in terms of, let's think of it broadly as legacy or stranded assets and how those are then safely operated, because there's also a piece here just in terms of your iPhone starts getting a bit wobbly after a while, just the way that hardware and software updates need to be carefully managed within this, and I'm more concerned about the cyber vulnerabilities of that rather than a company proactively abandoning them because of lack of capital. To your point around this broad transition from access, from ownership to access, as it's called in the industry, I think broadly that is a very good thing. So I think if we were to manage that correctly, a big if there, I think there are definite benefits that could come from this. So a lot of this is around saying, if poorly managed, what are the potential outcomes from autonomous, the widespread adoption of autonomous vehicles, but I think let's drill down a little bit further into that. A business model for deploying autonomous vehicles is a robotaxi, which is an access, not ownership model. There are also operators who still want to deploy a cell software that is able to make other cars autonomous. So the most well-known of this is Tesla, who are selling cars with full automation capability. I put that in heavy inverted commas, as a feature, as a kind of premium feature of that, and there are many others as well around that. So I think there's that piece as well. The second piece is around the amount of time, what are called zombie miles or deadheading. There are different words for it in terms of the vehicle miles traveled without a passenger. So with a very expensive driver, an Uber and a Bolt typically spend between 50 and 60% of their time, depending on the city, driving around seeking, looking for a passenger to pick up. When you remove the biggest cost from that, which is your time or my time or your Uber driver's time, then again, to this point in terms of, I guess, very simplistically, kind of like how capital works, is very inexpensive for these big companies to deploy capital. So buying a £200,000 robotaxi may sound expensive to me, but actually, if you're Alphabet and you've got a cash pile of several $100 billion, that's not an expensive thing to deploy. And therefore, with that cost of capital being almost close, very, very close to zero, when I'm out in London on a Friday night, or I'm at a whatever rugby match or whatever it is, it makes sense for them to give many options on the off chance that anyone on this call who happens to finish and step out their door, they have one right there for them. And so this idling time, or these zombie miles, I think are going to be very significant in terms of that. So I think there's not a full answer there, Stephen, and there are ways, I should say, that you can, if you can capture that penultimate slide I showed, which involved capturing the full cost of this. I think there are ways that you can manage this and regulate this successfully to mean that those zombie miles are frankly not worth it as well.
Thanks, Arthur. That's excellent. Really interesting, really interesting. So we've got a few questions to run through. I'm going to if they promise to be quick, because H, you've been very keen and put 3 questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to invite H and Natalie to come off mute and ask their questions if they're very brief indeed. Natalie, do you want to go first? Because you've stepped your camera on, so you're ready to go. So let's get a question in from you. Please keep it short.
Yeah, thanks, Arthur. I mean, it's terrifying, and I'm left with sort of palpitations. I think my question is one of urban realm, because we've already got these guys coming to LCC and saying you should be supporting us because it's going to be safer for cycling and our track record is miles better, and please LCC back us. And we're very wary because we see a scenario, I think, that surely the emphasis will then be towards controlling the public realm and the urban realm, and actually they will be motivated to try and put everyone in their space and do actually exactly the opposite of what we're trying to achieve in our cities, which is one of shared space where pedestrian is king and cyclist is second. For these AVs to work, surely they have to put everybody in the right place, and we're straight back to the pedestrians behind fences, cycling behind, yes, segregated cyclists cycling, but you can't go anywhere else, because in order for the AVs to work, they have to have the road to themselves. And they have so much power, these people, that they are going to be trying to play the logical, well, look, guys, for us to make it work, we have to control the urban realm. How do we counter that?
I agree with every part of that, Natalie, and I think there's no coincidence that the cities in which they've successfully deployed are places like Los Angeles and Phoenix, where there is both illegal to cross road at places that you're not allowed to through the jaywalking laws, and also a city that's built around the car. So I think there's a real issue in terms of those pieces. To the piece about how we regulate that or push back on that, I think a huge part, and this is not being sycophantic to Steve, a huge part is conversations like this. It's make sure it's getting out there and having the crib sheets and the tools ready to argue those points. It's understanding how power works in these spaces. So, for example, at Transport for London, we are to an extent being told what happens. Even Department for Transport, I believe, is heavily being told what to do in turn by Treasury, who are in turn being heavily lobbied by the most senior people at some of these large companies. So, follow the money, and part of it is going with that. So part of this is making sure the messages are out there, talking about it, pushing about it, making sure that we're talking to people at the most senior levels of government in terms of some of these issues as well. Maybe that's being kind of naive in terms of some of it, but those are the tools I'm trying to use to make sure it kind of gets out there and keep banging the drum as well. And I think part of this is going to be it's at such a small scale to start with, and the argument is going to be so what they've worked to do is narrow the debate from all of these other issues, which we've touched on only a few, but there are a lot of complexities around this, to in-car safety and are we safer than a human driver? And that's taken a decade and $100 billion to get to that debate. So that's a lot of work that they've got to get to that piece there. And what we need to keep doing is banging the drum and reminding that is a factor, but there are look at all these other factors as well, and you've highlighted a few there as well, Natalie, which I think are completely right.
Briefly after, before I bring H in, the Carlton Reid in the Q&A picked up on your mentioning of Peter Norton's work, and he's just actually said that he showed how Motordom created the concept of jaywalking. Is that correct? Because Carlton's post is even going a bit more dystopian than you've already taken us, which is where the tech bros actually end up corralling us as humans.
Yeah, no, I mean that is completely correct, and to the extent to which our cities have been, and our laws, all these things have been defined by cars and car centricity is really shocking, and Peter Norton's work is phenomenal for that. I mean, I'm just going to share screen just to show one image here quickly. I'm not sure if you can see that.
Don't think it's come up yet. Oh, here you go. Yep, it's coming up.
So this is not a map of electric car charging points. This is a New York Times front page from 1921, I believe. Nation roused against motor killings. Now, for the New York Times to, this is in the 1920s. There were, I'm not even going to try and guess, but there were probably tens of thousands of cars on the road, not billions. And I'm not going to make up numbers here, but I'd imagine the deaths would be relatively, maybe in the hundreds a year. Over 1 million people killed directly by cars each year at the moment. Cars collectively since this front page has come out have killed more people than World War I and World War II combined. For the New York Times, or indeed in the UK for the Times or the Telegraph or whatever it is, or the Guardian, to publish a front page of this it's become so normal that it would be completely insane to publish a front page of this. It's neither here nor there. They'd be arguing this is not news. So interesting how the time, this idea of Back to the Future, how the times have really moved on, and we have become car blind and blind. Not on this call, I don't think, but many of us have become car blind and blind to those negative externalities that come with a car-centric, a car-dependent, a car-industrial complex.
Brilliant. Thanks, Arthur. So H, you had your hand up. If you promise to be really brief, or I can go to the Q&A.
I'll try. I'll go back to Mark Twain. Buy land, they're not making any more of it. We're talking still in moving vehicles, and vehicles take up a lot of space. Arthur hasn't mentioned charging for the use of the road by empty Waymos driving around. Now, if we made them pay for using the space for empty Waymos driving around, people would rapidly begin to focus on let's move people and products. I did this 30 years ago, talking about total mobility. You move the people and the products. When Como did their surveys, and that people who have access to a car on the street corner they can use, means that we have 19 fewer cars for every car that's on the road. So they're using up less space. You're getting the same mobility.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the penultimate slide when I was looking at the finances sought to articulate that, but I should have certainly done so more clearly, H. And you're right about the piece around if we can capture, when I talk about capturing some of the costs of these negative externalities, that's what I was indirectly referring to, but completely agree. Yeah.
John, just picking up on that, Arthur, John Garnsworthy in the Q&A has posted something he wanted to comment from you on, which is his understanding is that the damage to road surface caused by a vehicle is proportional to its weight to the power of 4. So there's a bit of maths for us this evening. And an electric car, therefore, does 5 times as much damage as a petrol powered equivalent. Major implications for city and urban infrastructure. What's your comment on that, and how do we get that message across more?
Yeah, I mean, it's an important one, and I don't know those ratios, but they sound very, very, very smart to me, and I like that. I'll be stealing them, John. Thank you. So I think a lot of this is also just talking about the way that, I mean, we do this at TfL and other places as well. We talk about zero emission vehicles, and as though that's therefore the answer. And so it's around saying that suddenly an EV is the solution to all your problems, or indeed a shared mobility system is the solution to all your problems. So I think making sure that when we say something is better than something else, that doesn't mean that it's therefore the right answer. And a lot of these things as well. I mean, my first recommendation was around this very easy to say and hard to do idea of denser cities. A lot of these things around actually how do you make spaces and places that people, neighborhoods that people want to stay in, that are attractive or affordable, and that you don't need a car. And this idea of car dependency is so central to all of this. And so that's almost kind of square one. And then if we can't deliver that, then we live in the reality that we need to knit together our cities, and therefore let's look at some of these other options as interim steps to do that.
And Arthur, another really interesting question we've had in the Q&A is from Beth Hiblin. She wondered whether you might comment on the negative impacts of one design trend, which is whether it be EV or autonomous vehicles, whatever mode, whatever engine they have, the design of cars becoming taller, wider, longer, heavier. Again, which is a really fascinating trend. What are your thoughts on that? You must have looked at that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the car spreading, or the scaling of cars, getting heavier, getting steeper bonnets it's proven to have obviously incredibly detrimental effects to people, and usually pedestrians and cyclists being hit by cars. There's an idea in America of winning the car crash. You have a car so big that your car will mess up their car if you do get into a crash. So there's almost a kind of this kind of arms race in terms of size of cars. I mean, I did a post a few months ago about that the Ram pickup truck is physically larger than the Panzer I tank. That was part of the invasion of in the Second World, the Nazi invasion of the Low Countries in the start of the Second World War. So these are the size and threateningness of armored vehicles being driven around the street, and it then correlates quite heavily to postcodes. That you have the wealthiest postcodes in the country. I mean, we're in the UK, so in the UK we're looking at places like Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, places like Islington, places like Camden, places like Westminster, which have the highest registrations of SUVs, which is not a clear definition, but a broad category in the country. So as in these are definitely not being used for serious off-roading. And one of my favorite scientists is a chap called Václav Smil, who many of you may know, who writes very, very amusingly about the huge inefficiencies of driving, but of SUVs specifically, if anyone wants to kind of some light reading over the weekend.
We'll pick you up on that, Arthur. That can be our reading for the weekend, everybody. Ruth, if you promise to be really quick, I'll bring you in and you can come off mute.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Arthur. I was at the launch at the museum. I'm glad you could make it here. Very quickly, Steve. The issue about won't it make it safer for everyone if because these cars are supposed to be safer, but surely the guys who kind of run around fast, drinking, smoking, drugged, won't choose to use self-drive cars. They'll still be in their own cars because there'll be no law to make them. And is that not an issue that needs to be looked at as well? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, and to take the point maybe a bit obliquely, but to build on that there's a huge, I'm just going to call it a lie here, that a lot of these organizations are using in terms of what they broadly call accessibility. Now, accessibility is a number of pieces, but part of that is around economic affordability. The data on this in terms of the cities where Waymo is currently operating, so Waymo, one of the leading operators, is that at the moment they're roughly, this is data that's from January 2026, so January this year, they're roughly between 15 and 25% more expensive than Lyft or Uber. So this idea that you'd think that take out the most expensive part of it, which is a human driver, you then have a machine and you can subsidize it to whatever extent you want, that you would then end up saying that is less expensive because you don't have the human. So they're pricing it as more expensive. So this idea of accessibility and affordability is complete guff at this stage. When I again spoke about this publicly, I've had the AV lobby jumping down my throat saying you don't understand economies of scale and technology trends, this kind of stuff. So maybe I may well be proved wrong with this. And then you get into a whole question about induced demand and some of the challenges there. So I'm not sure there's a win here in terms of that, but you're right in terms of that. This is not going to be an inexpensive option to nip around place, which may be good in terms of fewer VMTs, but it will still mean that there's not an accessibility argument as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Arthur. So I'm going to read this one out. It's from Tim, long-standing attendee, Tim Morton, which is he wants to know whether he's suffering from confirmation bias. So we're edging towards therapy here, Arthur. I hope that's okay. Because he's seen an image of Waymo stacked up outside a music concert, unable to move forwards or backwards, causing gridlock. And this week, a Waymo getting stuck in a London one-way street at 3 a.m, waking up all the neighbours. I can feel a new Instagram channel emerging of Waymos doing stupid stuff. So is he deluded or are they a bit crap?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there is. I'm certainly guilty of confirmation bias as well, in terms of you kind of the algorithms tell you what you want to hear, and we're in a amongst people who may be sharing stuff with us. So I'm sure there's an element of that. I'd say, I mean, these things, automation technologies are fantastic in many ways and can be deployed in many interesting ways that could make mobility safer, could make mobility more accessible, could make mobility fewer VMTs and all the rest of it. So I think there's a world. I've given probably quite a pessimistic presentation this evening to you all. So I'm not saying that therefore all of these organizations are evil or anything like that. It's more saying around, if there was a single message from this, it's there are many, many risks as well as opportunities that need to be considered. policymakers need to make sure that if they're working through those risks, that they capture some of the negative externality, all of the negative, as much as they can of the negative externalities, and that benefit is passed on to citizens who are going to be impacted by this. So, but I mean, yeah, Waymos do lots of silly, stupid things. There was a thing on the BBC last week of them driving into a police cordoned off zone in North London. I've been sent mindless videos of them jumping red lights and speeding, and they knocked a child over outside a school in Monterey, California in January. So they're doing all sorts of things which are not good. But I think we shouldn't necessarily be throwing all automation technologies out with the bathwater. It's thinking, how can we thoughtfully apply them to make sure they actually do the best for citizens rather than for the shareholders of Alphabet or Amazon.
Thanks, Arthur. As all revolutionaries would say, Arthur, a better future is possible. That goes without saying. I'm just going to read out one from Tristan, because Shane, I think we've answered your question about safety and speed limits, so hopefully that's been answered to your satisfaction. But Tristan's written, I read about a sort of interim autonomous hybrid phase where we have low-level autonomy in cars that is engaged under 10 miles per hour. Sounds interesting. And this may also lead to an increased tolerance for sitting in congestion, being able to scroll on your phone, etc., and greater mileage and motor traffic. So do you think this is also a risk before full autonomy takes off? And could it even deter its expansion?
Potentially. I mean, again, without getting too technical in terms of there are these different, what are called the different levels of autonomy. And so this is, I suspect, referring to one of those levels and those. I mean, the way I visualize this in my mind and in our book is around a scale. It's not, you're not either autonomous or not. There's a sliding scale that between those, and that represents some of those levels. You start quite quickly getting into some psychology here and what's called automation complacency, and the idea that you're actually, even if you think something is, and a lot of the crashes that have happened in Teslas and a lot of the deaths that have come from that, when they think something is fully automated when it's only partially automated. So the gray area, in a very counterintuitive way, can be less safe than if you are vigilantly driving your vehicle. And so there's I'm certainly no expert in terms of some of the psychology around it, but there's some fascinating literature that is worth diving into in terms of where that sits. And it's not just for driving, it's across operating heavy machinery, it's across flying planes, it's across all sorts of things that are partially automated that humans still need to be involved in at different points, and how one can enter into that in a way that you're concentrating, and how many seconds it takes you to go from, let's say, on your phone or watching a film or falling asleep to in the zone in the middle of a crash.
Brilliant, Arthur. I'm going to just do one last one, and then we always try to wrap up about 6:10, so we're almost there, and I need to flag who's coming up next. But again, picking up on a question Tim posts, which was around the Waymo taxi and taking your control away. And I wondered whether you could do a final comment, leaning into that comment just then about psychology, and how it's not taken off yet, but I was trying to get the concept of auto hegemony to fly, and the idea that there's a culturally constructed reality here. And a lot of the culture around the car culture is about freedom, isn't it? And the open road and being your own person. And surely the whole idea of autonomous vehicles rubs against car culture so dramatically in that sense, doesn't it? That they can't, this would be the sales job of a lifetime, to get freedom fanatics to sign up to being autonomously driven.
I think that's bang on. I'm just trying to find the page we talk. So the first chapter, my co-author of this book, Henrietta Moore, is actually a philosopher and an anthropologist, and so not the most obvious person to write a book about the role of the car in the city. But she really brought a really rich philosophical lens into, and really unpacked, I think, very successfully, this question around what is freedom and what has been sold to us as freedom. Because the car has created elements of freedom for millions around the world, but it's also created unfreedoms for millions more. And that tension, and having a sophisticated conversation about what is, the freedom from and freedom to, and a whole bunch of things around that, are absolutely fascinating. And so I think the person is called Matthew Crawford, but don't quote me on that. He wrote a book called Why We Drive, and he's a philosopher as well. And he's a very unlikely person to quote in our book, because he talks about the joy of driving, the joy of fixing a car, the joy of having that feeling of independence as well. And I think there's this piece in terms of, I think relatively, I'm not someone who loves to drive, for example, but there are people who do love to drive. And for those people, I say drive. Like, I don't have anything against someone who that's their passion, they love cars and they love driving. This is for this book, and what I'm particularly interested in is around, of those VMTs, those vehicle miles traveled, I would say on a good day, 1 billion are by people who are really loving the road. But 16.99 trillion are of people who are driving to do something because they have to, and that if they could, do a Harry Potter and apparate from A to B, they'd do it. It's just the most efficient, or the most whatever thought, the laziest or the fastest or whatever is way to do it. So, but this idea around why we drive, and I've heard people compare this to riding a horse, that perhaps driving will become kind of a kind of esoteric thing for the rich and daring, back to what driving was back in the 1890s, rather than something that 1.7 billion people do around the world because they don't have a better option.
Arthur, that's been a tour de force. I am going to wrap us up. H, I know you wanted to come back in, but I'm sorry, I'm going to wrap it up for this evening. Please post anything in the chat you want to, H. Should we have a final round of applause? I love it when the little floaty hands go up the screen. So if everybody wants to give Arthur a big round of applause, that would be, look, there they go. See, the joys of Zoom, everybody. Don't get that on Teams. Arthur, that was excellent. Thank you so much.
It was been an absolute pleasure to be here. I think my email was at the bottom of some of the slides, and I'm on LinkedIn as well. So if people want to reach out or to stay in touch, they're very welcome to. And a huge thanks to you, Steve, and for Ruth, and for everyone for being, and Sally for being part of this. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thanks, Arthur. Okay, great stuff, everybody. H, email Arthur. You can pick up the conversation. Sorry, I didn't bring you in. I'm just going to give a quick plug before we wrap up to next week, where we will have Alice Ferguson and Tim Gill taking us through their new report, Streets for Play, Streets for Freedom, How a Child Lens Would Transform Transport Policy. And then, as an extra inducement, the cherry on the cake, Ranty Highwomen will be giving us a lowdown on the good and the bad and the interesting. So that's all next week. Make sure you come back to us. Thank you, everybody, for your brilliant questions. And thanks, Arthur, once again. Have a good evening, everybody. Take care.